All right, people, this is the beginning of the end. Okay, this is the first lecture of the last portion of this class. So if you are tired, I understand. Get yourself some dark chocolate, 95% cacao. It is medicine. It has caffeine in it. Okay, and dig deep. Okay, because this last part too is very, very important. Right now, let's get started. Let's digest. We're going to kick off lecture at 1 by going over briefly what digestion is and then doing an anatomy review. So digestion is defined by breaking down food extracellularly. And what that means is I'm breaking down food outside of the body. Okay? And so remember, inside of my mouth and in the lumen of my digestive tract, that is really outside, hence this word extracellular, right? So I'm going to break down my macromolecules into monomers, is because in order for me to now absorb molecules, they have to be small, okay? And the digestive process is regulated by nerves and hormones. Now, there's 5 main processes. So I have this little picture here. And what you folks are seeing is it starts off with digestion. However, first, we need to put food in our mouth. So here, we put food in our mouth, that's ingest. But as soon as we start chewing, that's mechanical digestion. And then we need to do something called chemical digestion. And we need enzymes for that because our teeth and our muscles within our digestive tract cannot get the food small enough to absorb. That's where enzymes come in. So we need to secrete. We need to secrete enzymes into the lumen of our tube. Now we have our monomers. Then we can now absorb these molecules in our body. Now, in order to undergo digestion and absorption, we need to now have propulsion or motility. And all that means is we got smooth muscle moving the food down our digestive tract. And then when we're done absorbing, we eliminate whatever we did not take up into our bodies. Now let's get into the anatomy. So here, if you remember, is that the GI tract is basically one big tube. So let's draw that tube right here. I'm just going to draw a generic tube. And this tube is going to represent the entire GI tract, okay? Which means that starts from the stomach all the way down, the mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestines, large intestines, rectum, okay? That's the GI tract. And so if you think about the schematic of the GI tract, yes, it's a long tube. However, within the tube, you have now something called accessory organs. Pretty sure that's not how to spell it, but moving on. So you have accessory organs. And so what accessory organs are doing now, and if I may draw a generic accessory organ, is they're making molecules. A lot of these molecules are enzymes, and these are now being secreted into the GI tract, digestive tract, in order for you to now break down molecules so they're small enough to absorb. Now, let's get into the histology. So I know many of you folks don't remember histology or either blocked it out. So here it is again. And if you folks remember, the GI tract is made out of 4 layers. Okay, so if this is the lumen here, I'm going to have my first layer, that's the mucosa. The mucosa layer is always right next to the lumen. And in here, you're going to have epithelial layer, right? With some types of gland, okay? And we'll get into different parts of the GI tract, and I will tell you, hey, look at the gland in this part of the GI tract. So pay attention, because each intrinsic gland is specific to where we are in the GI tract, all right? Now, have the epithelium, and then of course I've got connective tissue, and then I have this layer of muscle, the muscularis mucosa, and that's just allowing us now to move the mucosa, and that allows us to have more interaction with the food, or we can also call it bolus or chyme. It really depends where you are in the digestive tract. So if you're in the mouth and you ingested, we call it food. Once you chewed it, it's bolus. And once it gets into the stomach and beyond, it's called chyme, right? That's the first layer, mucosa. Then we have the submucosa, which is under the mucosa, right? And so, yes, you've got a whole bunch of connective tissue, blood vessels, lymph, but then we get something called the submucosal plexus. And in here, oh, let's not draw red on red. Let me pick another color. And I think purple shows up. Let's see. So the submucosal plexus is a network of neurons outside the CNS. Okay, and if you remember, there's a term for that. It starts for the G. I'll give you 5 fake points if you can say it right now. Oh, I didn't hear anybody talk. So nobody got 5 fake points. It's called ganglion. Okay, so you folks remember, this is going to play an important role as we move forward, right? So in the submucosa, there's something called the submucosal plexus. There's ganglion in there, and that ganglion can help control digestive processes. Now, there's another layer. This is the muscularis externa. This thing is huge. And yeah, there's a lot of different muscle types, and we're not really worried about the different muscle types. Just know that, yeah, there's major smooth muscles. And I want to point that out. This is smooth muscle. And this smooth muscle in the muscularis externa allows us to have the motility of digestion. Gotta move things along, okay? Now, one thing I do want to point out is, look, we have something called the myenteric plexus, okay? So guess what? The myenteric plexus is also a network of neurons outside the CNS. So there's ganglion in here, okay? And the ganglion in here will also help control the motility of the GI tract. And then, of course, there's the last layer, and that's the serosa. That is a connective tissue layer that allows us to now wrap up the organ, okay? Now, let's move on. All right, let's move on to the intestinal histology. And what you folks are seeing right now is a cross section of the small intestine. And I know so because I have these finger-like projections called villi, and then I also have these depressions called crypts. And all we're doing here is increasing the surface area so we can have more absorption, yes? And then in the crypts, I can have these little depressions where I can now trap food particles in here and begin digesting or begin absorption, depending where we are in the intestine. And then, of course, I have my submucosa. And so I have my blood vessels, and these blood vessels are going to now break into capillary beds in order for me to also absorb, right? So here, what I want to point out is in this area, right, underneath the muscularis mucosa, here's my submucosal plexus. So remember, what's in here? These are ganglia, right? The ganglia that are going to help me control the activity of the GI tract. And then embedded within the muscularis externa, that's my myenteric plexus that also have ganglia that are going to allow me now to control the major motility of the GI tract. All right, that's it for our anatomy histology review. Next up, we're going to go more deep into the processes of digestion.